Hey everyone, this is Michael again, and welcome to the AEW Dynamite review. Dynamite tonight was from the Nutter Center in Dayton, Ohio, and the show just finished, and I gotta say, Dynamite tonight was a very good, enjoyable show. We had Jon Moxley versus Hangman and Paige. We had Konosuke Takeshita versus Brian Cage. Bryan Danielson ended up taking on Timothy Thatcher. Bryan Danielson working his way up to get his hands on MJF. We had the TBS Championship on the line where Jade Cargill defend the title against Red Velvet. Whether Jade Cargill will go 50-0. And in the main event, we had a no-holds-barred match. The TNT Championship was on the line. Darby Allin defended the title against Samoa Joe. But overall, Dynamite tonight was a very good, enjoyable show. And it flowed really well. The 2 hours went by, just like that. But very enjoyable show it was. But anyways, let's jump right into the review. Dynamite opened up tonight with Jon Moxley versus Hangman and Paige. Jon Moxley made his way out. He was accompanied by his dad and Wheeler Yuta. Jon Moxley made his way down from the crowd to the ring. And then Hangman and Paige came out. So before Paige even got into the ring, Moxley ended up jumping Paige and he started launching Paige around ringside. The match did not get underway at this point. So Moxley was, just taking down Paige. Moxley ended up putting Paige through a couple of guardrails, and both guys were fighting through the crowd. Paige then delivered a running boot to Moxley, who was seated in the crowd, and we had Moxley end up locking in a figure four on the floor to Paige, but Paige ended up fighting out of that. Moxley then ended up attacking Paige with a chair, and he put Paige's ankle in the chair. But Paul Turner, who was the referee, ended up preventing Moxley from jumping off the apron, which that allowed Paige to throw the chair into Moxley's face. So the chair connected to Moxley's face. So Paige then delivered a snap suplex to Moxley on the chair. And so far at this point, the bell still hasn't rung. So both Moxley and Paige end up rolling into the ring. The bell rang, so the match officially began. So we have Moxley up delivering a pair of elbows to Paige. So Paige ended up getting to the ropes. So Paige then delivered a German suplex to Moxley. And Moxley was bleeding profusely from a cut above his eye. So both Moxley and Paige were trading some shots in the center. Paige ended up catching a crossbody block from Moxley, and he connected with a fallaway slam. Moxley then rolled to the apron, and he ended up decking Paige in the face, who charged at Moxley. So Moxley locked in a rear naked choke, and he locked it in on Paige, who was now on the apron, and then he transitioned that into a Bulldog choke. Moxley was trying to go for a pile driver attempt, but Paige ended up trying to counter with the dead eye. So both Moxley and Paige were going back and forth. Paige ended up finally getting Moxley in a fireman's carry, and Paige dropped Moxley face first on the top turnbuckle. Moxley ended up catching Paige, heading up to the top rope, and Moxley started raking Paige's back, but Paige ended up biting Moxley's face. So with that, Paige regained control of the match, and he connected with a avalanche Death Valley driver to Moxley. So Page ended up going for the cover. Moxley kicked out. Moxley got to his feet. Page tried to boot Moxley in the face, and he did. But Moxley then flipped Page off, and Moxley ended up hitting a diving ace crusher to Page. So at this point, both Moxley and Page were exchanging some shots in the center of the ring. So Moxley then locked in a rear naked choke. Page ended up hitting a Saito suplex on Moxley. Moxley ended up rolling through, ended up hitting Page with a Saito suplex of his own. So we have Moxley deliver a suplex off the top to Page, and Moxley ended up going for the cover. Page ended up kicking out. So we had Death Rider ended up getting blocked. Moxley transitioned that into a rolling straight armbar, but Page was at the ropes. So Page ended up evaluating Moxley up and over the top to the outside. So we had Page end up coming off the top with a moonsault. Moxley ended up sidestepping. And so Moxley delivered the lariat to Page. Moxley then cleared the timekeeper's table, and he was looking to go for a powerbomb on Page, but Page fought out of it. Both Moxley and Page were trading clotheslines. Page then ended up hitting a powerbomb on Moxley. It was a pop-up powerbomb on Moxley through the table, so Moxley ended up going through it. So the ref, Paul Turner, was counting. Moxley barely made it into the ring before the 10 count, but Moxley ended up running into a lariat by Page, and then Page ended up hitting the dead eye. So Page ended up going for the cover. Moxley kicked out. So Page was looking to go for the stomp, but Moxley ended up moving out of the way. And so Moxley ended up laying Page out with a lariat. So Page was having trouble getting back to his feet. Moxley was measuring Page with some elbows. Page then returned with some shots to Moxley, and he ended up delivering a super kick to Moxley. And then Page delivered a small package driver to Moxley. So Page ended up going for the cover. Moxley kicked out. So Page was going for the buckshot lariat. That got countered by Moxley. Page then countered into a tombstone pile driver. And then he went for the buckshot lariat. So Page ended up going for the cover. Moxley kicked out, which was crazy. Moxley kicked out of a tombstone pile driver and then the buckshot lariat. So Page then locked in a bulldog choke. Moxley ended up getting to his feet. Moxley ended up rolling Page over his shoulder, and Moxley trapped Page's arm. So he got the roll up, and there you go. Jon Moxley ended up winning the match. Overall, this was a very good, entertaining match. They had Moxley and Page go out there and fight, and it was a hard-hitting match, and both Moxley and Page gave it all they got. So they end up beating the hell out of each other. So post-match, Claudio Castagnoli, Wheeler Yuta ended up coming into the ring. Page was upset about Moxley winning the match. And so Page ended up flipping off Claudio and Wheeler Yuta. Moxley wanted to keep fighting Page. Page was obviously upset. There was a point where Moxley ended up laying down in the corner, and just for Page to still beat the hell out of him. And pretty much that was basically that. But overall, very good, entertaining, hard-hitting match between Moxley and Page. And then we saw the Bunny, the Butcher, and the Blade. They were Renee Paquette and Jamie Hayter. So the Bunny ended up challenging Jamie Hayter to a match next week on Dynamite, and it will be a eliminator match. Jamie Hayter ended up agreeing. So we're going to see that next week on Dynamite. The Bunny versus Jamie Hayter in a eliminator match. And then we saw Soraya and Toni Storm. They were shown on the television monitor, and they were attacking Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, backstage. So we end up seeing that. And then we saw the Acclaimed. Oh, scissor me, daddy! The Acclaimed, Max Caster, Anthony Bowens. They end up facing Turbo Floyd and Truth Magnum. And this was just a squash match. The Acclaimed, Max Caster, end up calling Turbo Floyd and Truth Magnum the bootleg Beverly Brothers. So the Acclaimed end up winning the match. Post-match, Austin and Colton Gunn end up making their way down to the ring, and they end up saying that they want a shot at the World Tag Team titles, and that they want an answer from the Acclaimed. Bowens end up reminding the Guns that they're interrupting the top tag team in AEW, which are them. Of course, the Acclaimed are so over with the crowd. Everybody loves, the "oh, scissor me, daddy." So the Acclaimed end up deciding to ask the fans in Dayton, Ohio, to which the fans, don't think that the Guns deserve a shot at the titles. Bowens end up agreeing with the fans, and he ends up saying that the answer is no. So this led to the Acclaimed and Austin and Colton Gunn squaring off. Billy Gunn ended up pulling the Acclaimed and his sons apart. Billy Gunn ended up saying that he is sick of it, and that they can go ahead and beat the shit out of each other. So Billy Gunn then left the ring. He walked up the stage, and Austin Gunn ended up saying to his father that he is doing what he did their entire childhood. And he said, Billy Gunn can turn their back on them. And he suggested to his father that he drowns his sorrows in the bottom of a pill bottle, which that got to Billy Gunn. Billy Gunn then returned to the ring, and his mic ended up cutting out. He threw the mic down in anger, so there was a mic issue there. So Billy Gunn ended up asking his sons if they think they have what he has. So Billy Gunn ended up agreeing for them to get a title shot. And that left the Acclaimed a little confused there. So, we're going to be seeing that next week. So, we're going to have the Acclaimed versus the Guns for the World Tag Team titles. And at that point, you could tell that possibly Billy Gunn will be turning on the Acclaimed. He's going to help his sons win the titles. So that's where I see them going. And then we saw Alex Marvez. Alex Marvez was interviewing Jungle Boy, Jack Perry. Jungle Boy ended up saying that he's had an amazing time teaming with Hook, and that he's done the tag team thing before. He ended up saying that this year he is not going to be in tag teams, and that he's going solo. So pretty much that was basically what Jungle Boy had to say. But Jungle Boy, he works on his own. He works on his own good. So. And then we had Konosuke Takeshita versus Brian Cage. And this was a very good match here. This is the best run that Brian Cage has had in AEW. And Takeshita is just awesome. So the match got underway. We had a rolling elbow from Takeshita. He ended up sending Brian Cage to the apron. Takeshita then delivered a big boot to Brian Cage and then a flying plancha to the outside. Brian Cage then ended up grabbing Takeshita's leg, ended up hitting the buckle bomb to Takeshita into the ring post on the outside. Cage was looking to go for another buckle bomb inside the ring, but Takeshita ended up fighting out of that with some elbows. Cage ended up fighting off a back suplex attempt, and he ended up hitting a knee lift to Takeshita. And we had Takeshita end up delivering the Blue Thunder Bomb to Brian Cage. So Takeshita ended up going for the cover, and Cage ended up kicking out at 2. Takeshita then ended up missing a flying knee in the corner. He ended up landing on the apron. He got borne to the ring with a deadlift vertical suplex by Cage. So then Cage delivered the 619 to Takeshita. So Cage then delivered a running back elbow in the corner and then a release German suplex, to which Takeshita landed hard. Takeshita then got back up. He hurricanrana himself out of a powerbomb attempt, and he came off the top with a drop kick to Cage. Takeshita then delivered a lariat to Cage and then a bridging German suplex, and Cage ended up kicking out at 2. Takeshita then charged in with a rising knee. Cage ended up catching Takeshita, and Cage ended up hitting a buckle bomb to Takeshita. Cage was going for a powerbomb attempt, but Takeshita ended up reversing that into a leader bomb, and he ended up going for the cover. Cage ended up kicking out. So Cage then delivered a rolling lariat by Takeshita, but it was ducked. Takeshita then connected with a rolling elbow. Cage then delivered a back drop driver to Takeshita, and then a rolling lariat. So he ended up going for the cover. Takeshita ended up kicking out. Cage was going for the drill claw, but was countered by Takeshita into a drop brainbuster. And then Takeshita ended up hitting a second brainbuster. He ended up going for the cover. Cage ended up kicking out. Cage then ended up fighting Takeshita off. He flattened Takeshita with an F5. Cage then ended up sending Takeshita up on the top rope, but Takeshita ended up fighting back with an avalanche brainbuster. Then Takeshita delivered a rising knee to Cage. Takeshita ended up going for the cover, and there you go. Konosuke Takeshita ended up winning the match. Well, overall, this was a very good match here. Really enjoyed Takeshita and Cage here. Takeshita, like I said, he's just awesome. Very good in the ring. Brian Cage is the best that he's been in AEW. But Brian Cage needs to keep taking more wins here instead of losses. So give Brian Cage a win, please, soon. But overall, very good match this was. And then we saw the Jericho Appreciation Society. They were shown backstage, and Jericho ended up saying that Ricky Starks didn't lose to a baseball bat. He lost to them as a group. So Sammy Guevara ended up coming up with an idea. And that idea is called the Garcia Guevara Gauntlet. So Starks has to beat Matt Menard and Angelo Parker. Then if Ricky Starks, beats them, Ricky Starks has to either beat Sammy Guevara or Danny Garcia. So if Ricky Starks gets through Menard and Parker, Guevara, and Danny Garcia, he will get to face Chris Jericho. So pretty much that's basically what Ricky Starks has to go through to get his hands on Jericho. So, but Ricky Starks will definitely do it. So, but pretty much that was basically that. And then we had the Elite. We had the Bucks and Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega was on Dynamite tonight. He got his visa issues cleared up. So they were backstage. They ended up saying that they will put the Trios Championship on the line next week against Top Flight, Dante and Darius Martin, and AR Fox. So Stokely Hathaway and Matt Hardy, Isaiah Cassidy, Ethan Page end up coming up to the Elite. So Ethan Page ended up saying that he keeps his boys going. And so they set up a trios match for Friday on Rampage. So it's going to be the Elite versus Ethan Page, Matt Hardy, and Isaiah Cassidy this Friday on Rampage. Should be a decent match. And then we have Bryan Danielson versus Timothy Thatcher. Bryan Danielson working his way up to getting his hands on MJF, which their match is without a doubt going to be booked at Revolution. So I sense that match is going to be taking place at the pay-per-view. But this was a very good match between Bryan and Timothy Thatcher. Last time, saw Timothy Thatcher was when he was in NXT, and he ended up facing Ridge Holland. And that was his final appearance on NXT television. And of course, he had the Fight Pit match with Matt Riddle, to which Kurt Angle was the special guest referee of that match, which was a very good match. When Timothy Thatcher came into NXT, I remember he replaced Pete Dunne, who at the time was Matt Riddle's tag team partner. They brought in Timothy Thatcher because Pete Dunne was unable to travel because of the pandemic. So Thatcher and Riddle defended the titles against the Undisputed Era, which was very good. Very good match. So, but really enjoyed Timothy Thatcher when he was in NXT. Good wrestler. Good in the ring. But the match got underway with Timothy Thatcher diving for the Fujiwara armbar, but Danielson ended up getting to the ropes. Thatcher ended up driving his knee into Danielson's injured arm, and he ended up locking in a double wrist lock on Danielson. Danielson ended up getting to the ropes. He connected with some strikes. He ended up dropping Thatcher down to the mat with a dragon screw leg whip. So we had Thatcher end up driving some more knees to Bryan's spine, but Bryan ended up fighting back with some kicks in the corner to Thatcher. So Bryan then delivered a running drop kick in the corner to Thatcher. Thatcher ended up snapping Bryan down to the mat with an arm wringer. So we had Thatcher lock in the Kimura on Bryan, and he ended up lifting Bryan off the ground. So Thatcher ended up twisting Bryan's arm. He ended up yanking Bryan down into the mat. He lifted Bryan up by his injured arm. He then took Bryan and slammed Bryan's arm onto the ring apron. So we had Bryan end up trying to set the label lock on Thatcher. Thatcher ended up stopping that by reaching the ropes. Bryan fought back with some headbutts, but Thatcher ended up regaining control with some forearms to Bryan's shoulder, and he ended up throwing Bryan across the ring. Both Bryan and Thatcher ended up heading to the top rope. Bryan fought back, ended up sending Thatcher down to the mat. Bryan then ended up hitting the drop kick from the top turnbuckle to Thatcher. So he ended up hitting some strikes. Thatcher ended up slapping one of his strikes away, and he avoided another strike. So Bryan ended up rolling out of a pinfall attempt, and he nailed Thatcher in the head. So the referee was then taken down, and that led to MJF appearing. So before MJF can get into the ring, Takeshita ended up appearing through the crowd. So Takeshita ended up jumping MJF, and MJF and Takeshita were fighting to the back. So Thatcher ended up locking in the Fujiwara armbar. Bryan ended up getting to the ropes. Bryan then ended up hitting the German suplex at Thatcher. And then Bryan followed up with the Busaku knee. So Bryan ended up going for the cover. And there you go. Bryan Danielson ended up winning the match. Post-match, we went backstage and we saw Takeshita and MJF brawling. MJF ended up launching a chair at Takeshita. And both guys kept brawling until, officials and security end up pulling both Takeshita and MJF apart. So Renee Paquette then ended up revealing that next week it will be Takeshita versus MJF in an eliminator match. So that's going to be a very good match there. Looking forward to seeing Takeshita and MJF go at it. Should be very good. And then we saw MJF. MJF was backstage with Preston Vance and Lexi Nair. MJF had a suitcase in hand. And the suitcase was full of money. So MJF ended up giving Roosh that briefcase of money. He ended up saying to Roosh that he has 5 more of them if Roosh can beat Bryan next week. And for Roosh to rip Bryan's arm off. So there you go. That's Bryan's next opponent, Roosh, in this Gauntlet match. For Bryan to get his hands on MJF. Should be a good match between Bryan and Roosh next week. And then we had Jade Cargill versus Red Velvet. TBS Championship on the line. And this was just a very meh match, in my opinion. Red Velvet ended up attacking Jade Cargill. And she ended up attacking Jade Cargill while she was posing in the ring. So Jade Cargill ended up dropping Red Velvet with the elbow strike. So Jade Cargill ended up slipping out of the ring. Red Velvet ended up following Jade by diving out with a drop kick. And then Red Velvet ended up chopping Cargill. Both women went back inside the ring. Cargill ended up blocking a super kick from Velvet. So Cargill then ended up nailing a huge suplex to Red Velvet. Cargill ended up going for the cover. Velvet ended up kicking out. So Jade Cargill ended up slamming Red Velvet down to the mat. She followed up with a jumping elbow drop. And then she ended up slamming Red Velvet off each turnbuckle. So we had Layla Gray ended up taking a shot at Red Velvet while the referee was distracted with Jade Cargill. So we had Red Velvet end up coming back. She ended up nailing Cargill with a big boot. So we had Red Velvet end up trying to dive onto Jade Cargill. She ended up getting caught by her. Then Jade Cargill ended up slamming Red Velvet into the ring post. So we had later on, Jade Cargill ended up throwing Red Velvet across the ring. Of course, she showed off, started doing push-ups, to mock, Red Velvet. So later on, Kiera Hogan ended up appearing. She ended up sending Layla Gray down the stairs. And then later on, we had Aubrey Edwards end up getting distracted. And we had Red Velvet end up catching Cargill with a kick to her face. And that was getting a 3 count, but Aubrey Edwards was distracted. So as soon as Aubrey Edwards saw the pin, she ended up counting, and Jade Cargill ended up kicking out. So Red Velvet ended up locking in submission. Cargill ended up powering up to escape out of it. Cargill ended up throwing Red Velvet into the air, and she ended up catching Red Velvet, and then Cargill ended up hitting Jaded. So there you go. Jade Cargill ended up winning the match, retaining the TBS Championship. So Jade Cargill is now 50-0. So, Jade Cargill is not going to be losing that TBS Championship until Chris Statlander returns. Then Chris Statlander, when she returns, she's going to beat Jade Cargill. She'll be the new TBS champion, and she will end Jade Cargill's undefeated streak. But overall, very meh match. Typical Jade Cargill win. Nothing new. So then we saw Dr. Britt Baker, DMD. She was backstage. She was in the medical room. She ended up saying that she is fine. So then Ruby Soho ended up appearing to check on Britt Baker. Britt Baker ended up saying that they are Soho's girls, but she ended up claiming that she has nothing to do with it. So pretty much, that was basically that. Main event, Darby Allin versus Samoa Joe. No holds barred match for the TNT Championship. Very good, entertaining match this was. Both Darby Allin and Samoa Joe gave it all they got here. These guys went to war. So we had Darby Allin. He ended up coming out, and he was wearing a jacket that was full of thumbtacks, which was crazy. So Darby Allin ended up launching into Samoa Joe. Joe ended up using his towel to wrap around Darby's arm, and he delivered a massive lariat, and he pulled the jacket off Darby Allin. He started stomping Darby Allin down. Darby Allin ended up fighting back, and he ended up busting Samoa Joe open. So Joe was bleeding. So that just angered Joe. So Joe ended up retrieving a table from under the ring. Darby Allin ended up launching himself into the table, knocking down Samoa Joe. So Darby ended up setting up the ring steps on the outside. Joe whipped Darby over the ring steps, and he ended up landing on the guardrail and then face first into the crowd. So we had both Joe and Darby end up heading to the crowd. Joe then slammed Darby on the cement stairs, and Joe ended up tossing Darby over the guardrail onto the floor. And then he body slammed Darby on the top of the ring steps, which was crazy. So Joe then delivered a kick to Darby and then a diving elbow drop. Joe was looking to twist Darby's head off of his shoulders, but Darby ended up fighting back with some strikes. Darby then ended up charging Joe in the corner. So Darby ended up going for the cover. Joe kicked out. Joe then ended up retrieving another table from underneath the ring, and Joe then placed the table across the guardrail. Joe was looking to go for a choke to Darby, but Darby ended up connecting with a jawbreaker, and he started delivering some chops in the corner to Joe. Joe then ended up launching Darby over the top rope out to the floor. Joe then delivered a brainbuster, and he didn't go for the cover, and he decided to grab some chairs. Joe then threw the chairs into the ring. Joe then ended up setting up the chairs in the ring back to back. And so Joe picked up Darby, and he delivered a back suplex to Darby on the spine of the chairs, which that was crazy. So Joe ended up turning the chairs around. He looked to go for the powerbomb. Darby ended up throwing powder in Joe's eyes. So he reversed that powerbomb into the code red. So Darby ended up going for the cover, and Joe kicked out. So Darby then delivered a stunner to Joe. So Darby ended up hanging on to the hoodie with the thumbtacks over himself. He ended up going up to the top, and then Darby landed the coffin drop onto Joe. Darby ended up going for the cover, and Joe ended up kicking out. So Darby then retrieved a blade from under the ring, and he started cutting the canvas. He started cutting the string that is attached to the canvas, and so he went around, cut them all, and he ended up exposing the wooden boards. He ended up pulling out the padding, So all you just saw was the wooden boards. So Darby Allin ended up getting crashed through a table. Joe then ended up powerbombing Darby onto the thumbtack jacket. He then pulled the jacket onto Darby's face, but Darby ended up getting out of it by poking Joe in the eye. Darby Allin ended up following up with some chair shots to Joe, but Darby Allin was prepared to go for a coffin drop. We had Samoa Joe end up pushing the official onto the ropes, which knocked Darby Allin down. Joe then ended up heading to the top turnbuckle, and he ended up nailing a muscle buster to Darby Allin onto the exposed wooden boards. So Joe ended up going for the cover, and there you go. Samoa Joe ended up winning the match, and Samoa Joe is a 2-time TNT champion. So post-match, Wardlow ended up coming out, and he ended up charging down to the ring, and Wardlow ended up spearing Samoa Joe. And so Wardlow was aiming to hit the Powerbomb Symphony to Samoa Joe, but Joe ended up slipping out of the ring, and pretty much that was basically how Dynamite went off the air. The TNT Championship, in my opinion, is being hot potatoed. I mean, what was the point of taking the title off Samoa Joe and putting it on Darby Allin just for Darby Allin to lose it tonight and have the title go back to Samoa Joe? So it didn't make no sense of taking the title off of Samoa Joe when you were going to put the title back on him. Doesn't make any sense why you had to lose the title. But overall, very good match this was, very entertaining. But the TNT Championship, they should just call it the hot potato title. It's almost like this is AEW's 24/7 title. The TNT Championship, it deserves better than just being hot potatoed. But overall, very good, entertaining Dynamite this was tonight. It was good to see Timothy Thatcher again. The match, with Takeshita and Brian Cage was awesome. It was very good. The No Holds Barred match here between Joe and Darby Allin was just, good and awesome. And, just made for a good show. But anyways, that's it for my review of tonight's Dynamite. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed this review. Give the video a thumbs up, comment, subscribe. And until next video, which will probably be my review of SmackDown and AEW Rampage. So, till then, see you all later.